Erev Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bikkurim. We are up to Perek Bet, Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbaev, Neriyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. Today's Mishnah is going to contrast Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim with Teruma. The Mishnah says, Yesh b'Maaser u'Bikkurim mash'enkin b'Teruma. There are laws that apply to Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim, but not to Teruma. Sha'Maaser va'Bikkurim ti'unim havat makom. Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim must be brought to a particular place, meaning the owner has to bring them to Yerushalayim where they must be eaten. Ut'unim vidui, and they require a declaration, meaning the owner declares every 4th and 7th year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle that he has dealt with his Maaser Sheni in the required manner, and when he brings Bikkurim to the temple, he makes a declaration thanking God, and the Mefarshim give us a background. On the last day of Pesach of the 4th and 7th years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, one says the Vidui Maaser, the confession of Maaser found in Sefer Dvarim chapter 26, Psukim 13 and 14. In it, he declares that he has properly fulfilled all his obligations with regards to Terumot and Maasrot. We spoke about this in the Mishnayot Maaser Sheni, chapter 5, Mishnayot 10 to 13. The text of the Vidui Maaser makes reference to both Maaser Sheni and Terumah. But when our Mishnah states that the law of Vidui Maaser does not apply to Terumah, it means that someone who has only Terumah and none of the other tithes, he would not say Vidui Maaser at all. Terumah is included in a recitation of Vidui Maaser that was going to be made anyway. But Terumah does not require Vidui Maaser in its own right. So in this respect, the Rav writes, Terumah is different from Maaser Sheni because even someone who has nothing but Maaser Sheni must still recite the Vidui Maaser. Va'asurim le'onen, and the Mishnah says they are forbidden to an onen, someone whose close relative has died but has not yet been buried or was buried that day. The Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon disagrees with that last point. He rules that an onen is allowed to eat Bikkurim. Right, the Rav explains why is it asurin la'onen according to the Tanakama. But Maaser Ktiv, regarding Maaser, it's written, Lo achalti be'oni mimenu, I did not eat it while I was in onen. Bikkurim ne'emar, and by Bikkurim it says, V'samachta b'chol hatov, you shall rejoice in all the good. Melamed, that teaches us she'asurim le'onen, that it's prohibited to an onen. Rabbi Shimon Matir, Bikkurim le'onen, the Rav adds that Rabbi Shimon, when it says Matir, it's referring to Bikkurim. The Turma karanhu achmana, because the Torah calls Bikkurim Teruma, Uturma Sharia le'onen, and Teruma is permitted to an onen. That is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Hayavin b'biur, the first Tana continues, and Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim require biur, meaning every 4th and 7th year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, any Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim that have not yet been eaten in Yerushalayim must be destroyed. The Mefarshim explain on the day before Pesach of the 4th and 7th years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, in contrast with Vidui Maaser, we said on the last day of Pesach. Here it's on the day before Pesach of the 4th and 7th years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle. One must perform Bi'ur Maasrot, removal of Maasrot, spoken about in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 14, Psukim 28 and 29. This means that he must separate Terumot and Maasrot from any Tevel he still has in his possession and give them to the proper recipients, meaning he gives Terumah to a Kohen, Maaser Rishon to a Levi, and if he has Maaser Sheni or money with which Maaser Sheni was redeemed, or Bikkurim that he cannot bring to Yerushalayim that day, he must destroy it. But Terumah, however, may not be destroyed. It must be given to a Kohen even after this day, like we said in Mishnah Maaser Sheni, chapter 5, Mishnah 6. The Rabbi Shimon Poter, Rabbi Shimon disagrees here also. He rules that one is exempt from having to destroy Bikkurim, because again, Rabbi Shimon holds that Bikkurim are like Terumah, which is not destroyed, but is given to a Kohen, like we said with previously. And Rabbi Shimon's ruling also appears in Mishnah Maaser Sheni, chapter 5, Mishnah 6. And the first time it continues, V'asurin kol shen mile'echol b'Yerushalayim, any amount of Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim that becomes mixed with permitted food permitted produce in Yerushalayim may not be eaten outside of Yerushalayim, no matter how much permitted produce is in the mixture. Instead, the entire mixture must be treated as Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim, which may only be eaten in Yerushalayim. And Mefarshim explain, we learned that when a forbidden substance becomes mixed with enough of a permitted substance, the forbidden item is nullified and the entire mixture is permitted. But if Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim were nullified, the entire mixture would be permitted to be eaten outside Yerushalayim. But it's a general rule that nullification does not take place if the forbidden item is a davar shesh lo matirin, something that has permitted factors, meaning there are easily available situations in which the forbidden item is permitted. Now, this category includes Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim because they're permitted to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Therefore, if either of these foods becomes mixed with permitted produce, they are not nullified, regardless of how much permitted produce is present. However, this halakha, this law applies only if the Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim become mixed with ordinary produce, ordinary food in Yerushalayim. In that case, Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim is davar shesh lo matirin, something that has permitting factors, since it may be eaten right away in that very place. But if the mixing took place outside Yerushalayim, the Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim would not be considered davar shesh lo matirin, something that has permitting factors, because it would have to be carried to Yerushalayim, which takes great effort, and therefore the usual rules of bitul nullification would apply. As long as there is enough permitted food in the mixture, the Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim would be nullified, and the mixture may be eaten outside Yerushalayim. And when the previous Mishnah said that Bikkurim are nullified in the mixture, provided that at least 100 parts of permitted food are present, that was referring to a mixture created outside Yerushalayim. If you remember from the previous Mishnah, we spoke about when it's nullified, right? That's talking about outside Yerushalayim. In Yerushalayim, it would be davar shesh lo matirin, and it would not be nullified. וגידוליהן אסורים מלאכול בירושלים אף לזרים ולבהמה. The Mishnah continues, if seeds from the prohibited mixture were planted in Yerushalayim, their growths would be forbidden to be eaten outside Yerushalayim, and they would even be forbidden to non-Kohanim and to animals. And the Mepharshim explain, to give us a background. If seeds from a mixture of Maaser Sheni and permitted produce, or seeds from a mixture of Bikkurim and permitted produce, were planted in Yerushalayim, the growths from the seeds would be treated like Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim and may not be eaten outside the city. Even though these are new plants that do not contain any Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim, the rabbis decreed that since they are already in Yerushalayim, they may not be taken outside the city and eaten there. The sages applied this decree only in the case of seeds that were planted inside Yerushalayim, right? And they would be even forbidden to non-Kohanim and to animals. Now, the Mishnah taught us that if Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim became mixed with permitted produce in Yerushalayim, they are not nullified no matter how much permitted food is present, because they have permitting factors, davar shesh lo matirin. The mixture is therefore forbidden to be eaten outside Yerushalayim. However, the isur, the prohibition of eating Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim outside Yerushalayim, is not the only prohibition that applies to these foods. There are other restrictions as well. Bikkurim may not be eaten by non-Kohanim, and Maaser Sheni may not be fed to animals. These prohibitions do not have permitting factors, because they apply in all cases. So the usual rules of nullification should apply, therefore apply, with respect to these isurim, these prohibitions. So if so, it would come out that although the mixture may not be eaten outside Yerushalayim, it may be eaten by non-Kohanim in the case of Bikkurim, and it may be fed to animals in the case of Maaser Sheni. And the Mishnah is telling us that is not the case. Rather, we say since the mixture has the status of Bikkurim or Maaser Sheni with respect to the prohibition against eating it outside Yerushalayim, it has the same status with respect to the other prohibitions as well, and so it may not be eaten by non-Kohanim or animals. Now, the previous Tana who forbids the growths of mixture of Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim seeds and permitted seeds would certainly forbid the growths of actual Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim, but Rabbi Shimon permits the growths. Even in the latter case, Rabbi Shimon matir. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Shimon rules that growths of actual Maaser Sheni and Bikkurim are permitted to be eaten outside Yerushalayim, and certainly to be eaten by non-Kohanim or animals, meaning the growths of Bikkurim seeds that were planted may be eaten by non-Kohanim, and the growths of Maaser Sheni seeds that were planted may be fed to animals. Both set of growths are permitted to be eaten even outside Yerushalayim, despite the fact that they can be easily taken inside the city and eaten there. Because according to Rabbi Shimon, since these growths do not contain any of the original Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim, but are entirely new plants, they are permitted in every aspect. However, the Rav does right. Rabbi Shimon rules leniently only in regard to the growths of these forbidden foods. He agrees that the mixtures are forbidden because they contain actual Maaser Sheni or Bikkurim, which do not become nullified because of Dara Shesh Lo Matirin. And the Rav writes, Ven Halacha Ki Rabbi Shimon Bekulam Matnitin. The Halacha does not follow Rabbi Shimon in any of the cases of the Mishnah. The Halacha follows the Tanakama in each and every case. The first Tana continues, Hare elu b'maaser b'bikurim ashenkim b'tiruma. All these are laws that apply to Maaser Sheni and Bikurim, but do not apply to Tiruma, meaning Tiruma does not have to be brought to any specific place. It does not require a declaration of any sort. It may be eaten by an onen. It does not require bi'ul. It becomes permitted when mixed with permitted produce, and the growths of the mixture are certainly permitted. Now, in contrast to Maaser Sheni and Bikurim, which cannot be nullified inside Yerushalayim, Tiruma is nullified if one part becomes mixed with 100 parts of permitted produce, like we taught in the previous Mishnah. So this is a summary of the laws. The article elucidated gives us a nice summary of the laws of Tiruma, Maaser Sheni, and Bikurim with respect to nullification. Tiruma is nullified in a mixture that contains 100 times as much permitted produce. It makes no difference where the mixture was created. Maaser Sheni cannot be nullified in Yerushalayim regardless of how much permitted produce is present. Outside Yerushalayim, it is nullified in a mixture that contains a simple majority of permitted produce. Bikurim cannot be nullified in Yerushalayim regardless of how much permitted produce is present. Outside Yerushalayim, it's nullified in a mixture that contains 100 times as much permitted produce. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now contrasts Tiruma and Maaser Sheni with Bikurim. Yesh bitruma u'maaser ma she'en ken bebikurim. These are laws that apply to Tiruma and Maaser Sheni, but not to Bikurim. She'tiruma v'maaser usrin et hagoren. Tiruma and Maaser Sheni forbid produce that has been processed, meaning once produce has been completely processed, eating it is forbidden until Tirumot and Maasrot, including Maaser Sheni, have been separated from it. And now, literally, etagoren literally means the produce of the threshing floor, which is an expression borrowed from the law of grain, whose processing is completed on the threshing floor, where the farmer stacks the kernels of grain into a pile and smooths down the pile miriach. Now, before produce has been fully processed, it may be eaten casually, meaning as a snack rather than a meal. But once its processing is completed, it may not be eaten at all until its tirumot and maasrot have been designated. We learned this in the Mishnah Maasrot, chapter 1, Mishnah 5. The Mishnah continues, Veshlem shiur, and they have a required amount. Tirumah is usually 1/50th of the crop, and Maaser Sheni is 1/10. Now, the Torah does not set any minimum amount for Tirumah, but midrabanan, under rabbinic law, a generous person should designate 1/40th of his crop as Tirumah. A miserly person may designate as little as 1/60th, while all other people designate a 50th, like we learned in Tirumot, chapter 4, Mishnah 3. V'noagim b'chol ha'perot, they apply to all kinds of produce. Tirumot and Maasrot must be separated from grain, grapes, and olives according to the Torah law, and from all other types of edible produce according to the rabbinic law. Bifnei habayit v'shel bifnei habayit, they apply when there is a temple, when there is no temple, right? Even when the temple is not standing, like unfortunately today, Tirumot and Maasrot have to be separated from crops that grew in Eretz Yisrael. However, Maaser Sheni may not be eaten even in Yerushalayim when there is no temple. Instead, one redeems it with money and throws the money into the sea, according to the Rambam, Milchot Maaser Sheni, chapter 2, Halacha 2, Uba'arisin, Ubechachorot, Ubasikrikon, Ubagazlan. They apply to the produce of sharecroppers, tenant farmers, a sikrikon, which we explained earlier, and a thief. Although these people do not owe the land on which the produce grew, any produce that grew in Eretz Yisrael may not be eaten before its Tirumot and Maasrot have been separated, even if the land on which the produce grew is stolen. Just to go back, in chapter 1, Mishnah 2, where we mentioned this term of or we mentioned Sikrikon. Sikrikon, we explained, is a known murderer who would steal land by threatening to kill the owner. Now, we say even though the owner tells the Sikrikon to take the land, he does not really intend to give up its ownership because he expects one day he will recover it in court. Now, even in this situation, if produce was grown there, you still have to separate Tirumot and Maasrot. Hare elu bitruma u'b'maaser ma she'en ken bebikurim. These are laws that apply to Tiruman, Maaser Sheni, but not to Bikurim. Even processed produce may be eaten before Bikurim have been separated from it. Bikurim may consist of any amount, no matter how small, because Bikurim have no minimum amount, even according to rabbinic law, even midrabanan. Bikurim are separated only from the 7 species. Bikurim are brought only when there is a temple. Since the Torah requires Bikurim to be placed before the altar, they are not brought except when the temple is standing, and they are brought only by the person who owns the land on which they grew. That is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.